There are fewer than, get this, 60 hours until the first polls close. We're counting down by hours now. And then the healing begins, right? Hopefully. So will the news media help, or will it hinder that? Today we're going to try to answer that question. We have a jam-packed program with limited commercial interruption so we can cover this election from every media angle, starting with a week full of media missteps, mistakes, and opportunities. Joining me now, an all-star panel of top editors and journalists. Michael Oreskes, the head of news at NPR. Lynn Sweet, a columnist and Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times. Karen Tumulty, national political correspondent for the Washington Post. And Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. And I think we all have to start with the security scare in Reno last night. Donald Trump being rushed off the stage by security because a Trump protester, a Republican against Trump, was holding up a sign, creating a commotion in the audience. Now, we saw on Twitter after this happened, after Trump returned to the stage and all went well, that one of Donald Trump's advisors called this an assassination attempt. And then a couple of people and close to Donald Trump, like his son, retweeted that message, creating this narrative that there was an assassination attempt against Mr. Trump. Jeffrey, let me start with you. What are the consequences of this kind of blizzard of misinformation after a security scare?
Well, bad information moves faster than good information, right? So, I mean, but we've seen this over and over again in this race. Traditional media, meaning people who try to deal in fact-based observations, can't keep up with the torrent, the blizzard, whatever you want to call it. Can't keep up, and social media allows people like those in the Trump campaign who were tweeting that to move right past us. And so, by the time that news gets out, we're just playing catch-up and saying, no, this is not actually what happened. This is a very dramatic instance of that.
Right.
Obviously, assassination attempt is about as serious as you can get, and it's just another example of how we're just always playing catch-up with people who don't care about fact-based observation.
Karen, is it much worse? Is it qualitatively and quantitatively worse this year? As someone who's covering politics every day, is there more misinformation, more disinformation than there used to be?
I think there's both an issue of the quantity and the velocity. Because I think the real problem is too that even when somebody tries to rein in something that was initially misspoken, initially misstated, a wrong impression, I think you used to be able to do that. By now, by the time you figure out what the actual facts are, the not facts are way far ahead of you.
And then, of course, there's so much fake news. There's information that's misleading. There's claims by politicians that are bogus. But then there's websites that are trying to trick people every day, Lynn. Websites that are trying to hoax people. And all I see on Facebook are people buying it, being tricked.
Well, I think the biggest media story of this campaign is the rise and the total control that Twitter has over the messages, which then influence Facebook and everything else. You have an example that you used of the assassination of Trump. The only reason it came out so fast is because Twitter exists, and it never existed to this point. We know that Trump is the master exploiter of Twitter, because even if you have wrong information that we've talked about, until the rise of Twitter, even if you had bad information, even if you wanted it out, Brian, you couldn't have. That's the big story here, is that...
You used to have 10, 20, 30 minutes. Now you have 5 seconds.
And there's wish fulfillment happening. People are inclined to believe some of these lies. And here's an example of that. Let's play Donald Trump, something he's been saying all week long, claiming the television networks won't turn their cameras around and show the audience.
It's not easy. I have to put up with some of the most dishonest people in the world, the media. They never show crowds like that. Look at that. It goes all the way back. They never show crowds. They don't show crowds.
For the record, we do show crowds. The other networks show crowds as well. There's one pool camera, Michael, that is fixed on Trump at all times. That's on purpose, so that if something happens on stage, we have a shot of Trump. Other cameras do show the crowd.
And by the way, there's one pool camera focused on Hillary Clinton all the time.
As well. So why does Trump keep saying it when he knows it's not true?
Because he can reach lots of people with whatever his version of reality is. I think it's really important for us as the journalists to take a step back and say, yes, the world has changed, and yes, Twitter and Facebook and digital media in general have changed a lot. Twitter may or may not be around 5 years from now, but there'll be something.
There'll be something like it, yeah.
Something else.
Something even faster.
And we need to really frame what we're for, not what our problems are. We got a lot of problems. But we also believe in something that matters more than it's ever mattered, which is that verifying and establishing what's actually a fact has become more essential than ever before. And if we frame ourselves as having that as our purpose, I think a lot of people do actually come back to us for that. And one of the things that's interesting is that while there's a lot of nightmarish things have happened in this election about falsehood and just flat out lying, the public, I'm not sure, is reacting as quickly to all of these things as we fear they are, or as we do. So I think the role we can play with the public, if we focus more on them and less on these immediate twists and turns, will actually prove a real role for us.
Which I think the media writ large, especially the organizations with resources, for whom much is given, much is expected, would have played that role much, much earlier in this campaign.
You're saying you wanted more aggressive coverage of Trump and Clinton earlier on?
More fact-based, more fact-checking earlier on, more, I'm using the word investigations, but some stories were just kind of routine, looking at
calling out lies when they are obviously lies.
Right.
And it was hard, though. It's very hard because we have we're in a novel experience where you have I think one of the candidates blows past the truth fairly regularly and doesn't care when he's called out, and his followers, many of his followers at least, don't care when he's called out. It's hard to adjust to anything new.
And we
I
were
think
too slow to adjust. Every
disagree.
sign was there. I know media books will be written and a lot of introspection, deservedly so, but media writ large was slow to pick up on a lot of things.
By the way, at least social media is transparent. When something that is false gets out on Twitter, you can watch it happen. You can watch it happen on Facebook. Where you can't see, where it's sort of subterranean, is these emails that we have all gotten that have forward in the subject line, and that I think in some ways is the more pernicious information that's
and part
out
of this is on the audience. The audience has to be skeptical about those email forwards. Let's look at Fox News this week. Anchor Bret Baier on Wednesday claiming an indictment is likely in an FBI inquiry into the Clinton Foundation. Let's play two sound bites. First, this is Bret Baier on Wednesday reporting inaccurate information from anonymous sources, then on Friday walking it back and apologizing.
The investigations will continue. There's a lot of evidence, and barring some obstruction in some way, they believe they'll continue to likely an indictment.
That just wasn't inartful. It was a mistake, and for that I'm sorry. I should have said they will continue to build their case.
Many Clinton critics still believe an indictment is impending, and it's because of that Fox News report. Karen, what went wrong here?
Well, first of all, I should say, I think Bret Baier is a terrific journalist.
One of the best Fox has.
He is. He is absolutely. He's cautious and checks his facts. He says he misstated something, and I believe he misstated something. But this is a case too of the velocity. It's already out there. It's already being repeated over and over again. Even as Bret Baier himself stands up and said, "Hey, I screwed up here."
People don't want to believe his backtracking, but they do want to believe the original report. Jeffrey, isn't this partly, again, wish fulfillment, wishful thinking by the audience?
By the audience and by Bret. Now, Bret is a really good reporter, but
you think he was too willing to believe his anonymous sources?
Look, well, absolutely. But the problem here was that it was, from what I understand, one source, and here's a basic journalism mistake. We've all made it at different points, but
he may have had multiple sources on the word indictment, but he said he had one source on the claim, different claim that he also retracted,
the foundation.
That there was a 99% chance that her private email server had been accessed by 5 foreign intelligence agencies. He said that on air with only one anonymous source.
The atmosphere that has been created around this subject makes what he heard credible, and therefore, as the reporter, he feels that he can move that forward. And again, not to single him out, although this was his mistake this week, people have done that, and you go in the direction that the culture is moving, and that's what happened.
I'll tell you what I'm really worried about. I'm really worried about some kind of leak on Tuesday morning, an anti-Clinton or an anti-Trump leak, something that comes out through a seemingly reliable source intended to interfere with the election, and it can't be corrected in time before people go to the polls.
But this is, again, we're talking about it from the point of view of the audience. It's really important. Because I think people are a little smarter than we sometimes give them credit for. They know that last-minute things have always happened in elections, and I think they know that a lot of things that are being said at the end of this election need to be taken with a grain of salt. And besides all of that, they're making their decisions on much bigger questions. And a lot of those big questions revolve around trust and engagement across across communities. And the country's big problem, which then becomes our big problem, is that people don't trust each other. People don't believe in each other. People don't respect each other. And one of the big questions for us after this election is, we can call out people all we want for truth, for lying. We can do all of that and feel good as journalists. It won't make any difference unless we've built better connections to broader audiences. And the fact is that all of these news organizations, this one, Fox, everybody else, are speaking
but Michael,
to groups.
People seem to be impervious. They're just impervious. They've built them. They're hermetically sealed. They don't seem to take in
That's
new
all right,
information.
but I'm going to focus on being the glass half
you're an
full
optimist, and I'll be the
person that I am.
pessimist for the purposes of this panel.
But you're right. Some people are. There are
a lot of people are. That's one of the
Right.
discoveries of this cycle.
Fellas, one thing doesn't cancel out another. Okay? You can have both. Of course you want to know who your readers are better. Of course you want to do fact-finding. And I think you want to encourage reporters who make mistakes. Brett Baer, I applaud him for doing what he did. You know, he made a mistake. He said it. His apology was clear and precise. The irresponsibility was of the Trump forces who wouldn't let it go after he said he made a mistake.
Who keep saying there could be an indictment, yeah.
Right. So,
and to your point, Michael, about trust and about audiences, we need to keep understanding and covering Trump's America, whether he wins or loses. There was too much...
And by the way, Sanders America?
Yes.
And a lot of African-American America, Latino America. There's a lot of people in this country who do not feel connected to the society as a whole, and they don't feel connected to us.
Does it matter, Lynn, which reporters are on the air, which writers are writing the Clinton story? Does it matter that female reporters may view her candidacy differently than male reporters?
on Deadline, there's no gender. You got to just get the job done. And I'm glad that you asked, so that people who may wonder, is every female reporter throwing it? No, of course not. You know, it's just enough to get the job done. And this is a night of all nights where you leave everything alone. It's a big enough job just to get the story done right and on deadline, especially if it's a close call.
Newsrooms, though, still dominated by men. What I mean by that are most editors, most bosses are men.
You haven't noticed?
Karen, final word to you.
Does
this matter? Does a Clinton candidacy, does a Clinton presidency impact the way journalism's covered? Will it have an impact for women in newsrooms?
You know, I think that women in newsrooms are going to have to fight their own battles. As long as we are journalists, it really shouldn't.
It should only be so easy that that this gender inequity in newsrooms, which I've seen in my years, that it's taken so long to catch up in top management positions.
Right.
You know, in the beats now, in the political beats, we have a lot of women out in the trail, and that's one area where there's been a terrific equalization on gender. There's so much more to do in top management. No matter who's president, it's not going to change things just by that fact.
To our